Hello Reddit, this will be my third post on the subreddit, so I feel confident in saying that I might have some sort of gift I like to call the creeper magnet. Now, might be a good time to mention that I am female. Anyway, this summer started off with a trip to a very prestigious university for what is basically nerd camp. Most people there were actually very lovely, except for a handful of rather strange, sex-starved, or just plain socially awkward individuals who made comments that would send chills down almost anyone's spine. For example, one boy piped a comment about how we really shouldn't have any qualms about secretly injecting people's water supply with numerous biological chemicals as a means of testing what is suitable for biological warfare. Another brought a roll of what looked like 10,000 condoms and eagerly showed my roommate and I in a coffee shop with the biggest grin on his face. One of my 3 roommates also had a particular habit of waking up in the wee hours of the morning, getting dressed, hopping back in bed, and then darting out the door without even a hello as soon as any of us had woken up. The only real physical issues I had were at the final dance when us biochem kids were introduced to the engineers. I hate to bag on them since most of my brother's friends, including his wife, were engineers, but these kids were ridiculously creepy. I was followed the whole night by one kid who kept trying to teach me how to feel the beat in my veins and had my wrist grabbed by another kid I only met the first day. This is not even the worst of it. I've yet to introduce you to Brett. Brett is what my roommates and I described as the dictionary definition of a tool/douchebag upon first impression. He stuck out like a sore thumb among the sea of acne-riddled teens in oversized glasses and pants that were far too big, even with a belt. He came from money, unlike most of us, and liked to let everybody know how superior he was to everybody. He sat alone all the bus rides, and, until my roommates and I finally approached him, only mingled with his fellow Pennsylvanian, Drew, since they went to the same high school. He liked to brag about how long it would take him to get ready, and how he probably spent more time on his hair than any girl he knew. He was ridiculously good looking and he knew it. On one particular bus ride, the two of us managed to be stuck together when we got on late. His response was rude. "Man, I don't know if I can do this." I read silently next to him as he scrolled through Instagram pics. Glancing over, I saw one of him and another girl in formal attire, most likely for a dance. I saw this as an opportunity to initiate small talk, so I asked if it was his girlfriend. "Nah, none of these are my dates." He showed me his Facebook pictures of him with other girls in fancy outfits. There were close to a dozen. To be honest, I hate all these girls. He then showed me some picture of him at concerts, parties, and other random places, always with a girl at his side. "They're so dumb," he continued. "I know they like me, but I just hate all of them. I'll usually take them out when I'm bored, and we'll get hammered and then hook up, but that's it. I could never date any of them. Hell, I can't even hook up when I'm sober." I was past the point of being slightly uncomfortable. The way he was speaking about these girls was beyond fucked up. He described several hookups in very intricate detail, and referred to the girls as though they were pieces of meat. Then, the real crazy began. "I like to take these girls out to parties, and then get them super drunk. I'll take care of them at first, help them to the bathroom, hold their hair back when they throw up. Then I like to pull them back and shove them in their vomit, kick their face in it, spin on them, and then say, 'Fuck you.' These girls, they're so fucking dumb." If I hadn't been so shocked by the words he just spoke, I probably would have said something like, "What the fuck, Brett? You're a disgusting piece of shit." But all I could respond with was just a stare equally as emotionless as his. I think he found that intriguing, maybe a little comforting, maybe a little attractive because the rest of his trip he spent in my presence. He would often talk to me about how I was different, how I didn't give a shit just like him. He would tell me his stories about belittling and dehumanizing women as though I admired them. To be honest, I didn't say much because I didn't even know how to respond. He was a maniac, and he really got off on treating girls like garbage. He got off on reliving those memories too. We had the strangest level of friendship because I was so disgusted with him, and at the same time, he was such an attractive person. He was extremely charismatic, had a great sense of humor, and an extremely intelligent individual. There was something off about him though, and it was only because of what he had disclosed to me that I feel I was able to keep up with it. His eyes, piercing blue, were so empty and cold. When talking about personal topics or tragic events, he never missed a beat with a sympathetic reply, but it was so disingenuous. I discussed the topic with my roommates, and we came to the conclusion that Brett was a sociopath, a narcissist, or some type of other psychopath, and no matter how attractive, we should all stay away. After the camp ended, I never thought I would see him again, and he would simply be a creepy story to tell friends. That was not the case. My final trip of the summer, you better believe it, was to accompany my best friend, Pam, on her annual trip to visit her dad in Pennsylvania. Somewhere in these wooded forests lurked a monster by the name of Brett. I had no intention of meeting up with him, but I did plan on meeting up with his friend, Drew. We had hit it off during camp, sharing many of the same interests and hobbies. He told me before we left, if I was ever in PA or DC, I should let him know, and he would be more than happy to meet up. Although he and Brett hung out at camp, I knew they weren't friends back at home. They were far too different. Drew was a freckly, paper-white ginger who was 5'10" and maybe 135 pounds at the most. He played video games and hiked for fun. Not to mention, Brett specifically told me that he hated Drew. Apparently, Brett believed Drew was trying too hard to be like him. That was most definitely not true. So Drew, Pam, and I go hiking around this town. I don't ask about Brett when Drew mentions him, but my best friend is dying to meet him after everything I told her. Drew says he can invite us to a party, and then we can all catch up. We ended up going, since apparently Pam thought spending the night making venison jerky wasn't a preferable alternative to meeting a crazy man. The party ends up being something out of my nightmares. Raging college kids, alcohol, weed, sex, everything that makes me want to hide in a corner. Pam was having a blast, and so far I managed to avoid consuming any of the drinks Brett was shoving into my hands. He was staying way too close to me the whole night, trying to pull me away with him when I sat on couches, grazing my ass when I stood up next to him. At one point, he pressed me against the wall and forcefully kissed my neck before his not date came around and got very pissy with both of us. I hid from him the rest of the night. Eventually, the party began breaking up because someone got wind that the cops were coming. Drew was rushing me to the car, but I couldn't find Pam anywhere. I looked in the bathroom and found Pam flipping her shit and dragging me to the tub. In the tub, there was Brett's date. She was surrounded by vomit, and her face and lips were palish blue. Both of us began freaking out because she wasn't breathing. I called Drew, and he raced into the house, and the three of us dragged her out to the front and called for an ambulance. Drew was pretty stoned, but told us to wait in the car, and he would explain everything to the cops since he didn't want us to get in trouble. The cops came and questioned everybody at the scene. The girl was taken away, and Pam ended up having to call her dad to come pick us up. The next day, I called Drew, and he told me the girl was alright. He had also talked to Brett, who seemed completely unfazed by everything. Apparently she passed out while they were fooling around in the basement, so he took the liberty of dumping her in the bathtub, where he knew someone would find her. She was his friend. Then, apparently after that, he split because he didn't want to get in trouble for underage drinking. I know that the world is a fucked up place, and people can be downright evil, but to witness this firsthand is rather nauseating. Brett is only 18. It terrifies me to think about what he will be capable of in only a few years. So, let's all hope that we never ever have to meet the soulless eyes of Brett. Ever. Been lurking on here for a while, but thought I would share my story here. When I started college in 2011, I formed a solid friendship group and threw myself into the social life. One guy in my block, who always showed up to parties but never spoke much to anyone, was a classic neckbeard, overweight, anime fan, lacking in social skills, combined with awkward attempts to be overconfident. He also never bathed himself, wore stained gray clothes that never changed, had long, lanky, greasy hair, and was surrounded by a cloud of BO. It would enter the room before he did. Sorry if this description sounds unnecessarily mean. I wouldn't normally judge people for these things in themselves, but combined with his behavior since, it is frankly warranted. With regret in hindsight, I made the mistake of chatting with him at one of these parties. with the aim of being friendly and helping him get more integrated into the group. From that moment on, a switch flipped in him, and he began obsessively stalking me, which would go on for the rest of freshman year. He would try to isolate me at social events, talking to me for hours, and taking none of my cues that I wanted to bring it to a close. If I tried to lose him, he would find me. If I spent time with my actual friends, he would follow and force his way into a conversation, following me around like a wasp on a mission. If he saw me in public, he would give me this 1,000-yard, unblinking stare, even from a couple hundred meters away, and would come over. It got to the point that I felt some kind of tracker on me, because wherever I was, he would appear, even when leaving the campus library at 3 a.m. More than once at night, I looked through the spy hole in my door to the hall outside to see him standing there, staring intensely at my door. Obviously, this was seriously creepy behavior. I felt hunted. I was frightened and on alert all the time, and I started to avoid going out of my room. I also started going to my folks a lot so I could just get out of town. My friends were worried about me, and a couple of them confronted him about his behavior and asked him to leave me alone. This did not go down well. His obsession turned into rage. Thankfully, he kept more of a distance, but he would still hang in places he knew I would be, staring at me with intense hatred. He started telling everybody that I was his girlfriend and had dumped him in a horrible, cruel way. It made me question myself that a few people actually believed him. This continued into our sophomore year, when he got close to one of my housemates and started turning up unannounced at our place. This friend believed the stories he was telling and thought that I was being unfair in asking not to bring him around the house. He ended up stealing my mail, including a new bank card. I had no evidence that it was him, but I had so much stuff go missing and I knew he was doing this. I also found him once in my bedroom. That was the last straw, and my roommate finally accepted that this guy had been lying. When I moved away, the in-person stuff stopped, but he started cyber-stalking me, trying daily to hack any of my accounts that he could find. This continued, though to a lesser extent, for a period of 3 years, but since then, everything seemed to die down, and I thought it was over. I recently found his blog, where he writes fantasy stories about our relationship, and he calls me the love of his life, and this is more than 10 years later. I hope I never meet this weird neckbeard guy again. I used to work at Advanced Auto Parts as a delivery driver and was one of the 4 only women that worked there at the time. 2 of them were middle-aged and the third was decently older, all 3 being have there for a decent amount of time. So basically, I'm the new, young, pretty girl who knows her way around a car in a predominantly male work environment. That alone comes with its own set of issues, but it was nothing I hadn't dealt with before. On my first day, I made an instant friend with Jeremy. He was laid back, funny, and good at his job without being overbearingly professional. I guess that's why it kind of struck me when he looked at me seriously and told me to watch myself around Louis. Now, let's talk about Louis for a second. He was probably in his late 40s or early 50s, definitely old enough to be my dad. He wore glasses with the big 70s wire frames, had scraggly gray hair that poked from under his hat that were greasy and curly, and his teeth were stained brown from the years of dipping tobacco and apparently never owning a toothbrush. He had a slew of youngins, in his own words, and referred to his wife as his old lady, a picture-perfect example of what folks around here called white trash. But I was raised not to judge people and was friendly with him nonetheless. I just figured he was kind of a typical old pervert that was kind of creepy around younger women. Things were going well until about 3 months into working there, when I hit a deer with my car, completely destroying the front end. As circumstance would have it, 2 days before that, my then boyfriend wrecked and totaled his truck as well, leaving us with no way to go. A few days after the accident, ex-boyfriend decided that he was better off moving back in with his mom and left. We had just moved in together, and now I was going to be living alone in an apartment with no car and my family on the other side of town. With much protest from my mother, I began walking to and from work while trying to rebuild my car, as I only lived about 3 miles from the store and the small city I lived in had no means of public transport. Obviously, The people at work noticed that I was walking back and forth and offered me a few rides home and to come get me in the mornings, but I always declined. I honestly enjoyed the walk. One day, as I was about to walk out of the parking lot and around to the back of the building, Louie came around the front corner, hand in the air to flag me down. "Where you going, girlie?" he asked, his voice thick with a Cajun accent. "Heading home for the day, man. I'll see y'all tomorrow," I replied. "You know, I could give you a ride home if you wanted. Maybe even let you drive my baby." He had a brand new Mustang GT, matted black, and he thought it was the shit. "Is that right?" I joked, both of us knowing there's no way in hell I'm getting in a car with him. "Yeah, for sure. You just can't tell anybody about it, though." Okay, that was a weird comment to make. Hoping for the best, I said, "What? Tell them you let me drive?" Chuckling, he said, "Nah, that you was ever with me at all. I don't like put myself out there like that, you know?" No, I didn't know, and I was genuinely creeped out at that point. I laughed it off awkwardly and just walked away. Once I was sure he was out of sight, I pulled my pocket knife out of my backpack and put it in my pocket for a better sense of security. After that, Louis just got progressively weirder. He would follow me outside for my smoke breaks, even though he didn't smoke. He offered to take me home a few more times, always under the premise that I would keep it between the two of us, even making it a point to let me know that he knew which apartment complex I lived in, not just which building. I was already past the point of being creeped out, but I didn't want to make a fuss about it at work. I was already going through enough in my personal life already. I was still relatively new to the job, and Louis had worked there for years with no issues other than that he was known to be a weird dude. But the breaking point came when I got scheduled for a closing shift, just me and Louis. I dreaded it the entire week, but again, I didn't want to cause a big issue at work. After all, he hadn't done anything to me, and I hadn't told him just to leave me alone or anything. He was just so fucking weird. The day of our closing shift finally rolled around, and I was ready to have it over with. I had already arranged for a male friend to come pick me up that night, since the store closed after dark, and I was already pretty sure that Louis had followed me home at least once by this point. How else would he have known where I live? I'm careful not to divulge where I live, just to anybody. 5:30 came around and everybody left for the day, leaving me alone with Louis. We closed at 8, so I only had to make a couple of hours with him, and it would be over. While business was steady, everything was fine. But after about 7, there wasn't a single customer in the store. We were chatting with each other, just normal coworker small talk, when he asked how my ex and I were doing. He knew that when I got hired, I had a boyfriend, but I obviously hadn't updated him to my new relationship situation. We split up, I told him simply. He couldn't deal with neither of us having a vehicle. Louis said something I'm sure he thought was wise about a couple who struggled together, blah blah blah. I smiled and agreed with him and hoped we could change the subject now. Instead, he moved closer to me. I automatically flinched slightly as he began to speak again, so close to my face I could smell his breath. "This is why you need a real man, honey. You know, a grown man." He put his hand on my lower back, and I sidestepped his touch. My mind was screaming at me to get the hell out, but was that even an option? Yes, this was definitely inappropriate and overstepped the boundaries of the workplace, but there were no cameras in the store. Would anyone even believe me? He laughed and asked if I was uncomfortable. I decided just to be honest, and I told him I was. There was no use in lying. I knew my body language had given away my nervousness. He apologized casually and walked off to the back of the store, behind the battery rack and out of sight. I took this opportunity to text my friend and tell him to go ahead and come to the store and wait for me outside, quickly recounting what had just happened. Louis emerged with the push broom, and I realized it was 7:35. Thank God, only a little while longer. As he was sweeping and I was cleaning up around parts of the counter, Louis started up a conversation again. We were still the only two in the store. "Yeah, I didn't mean to freak you out or anything earlier, you know?" "Yeah, man, I know. It was just kind of inappropriate for work." "Yeah, you right. If we was out on town now, that'd be a different story though, huh? I mean, it'd be more appropriate than at work, but we work together, man. It's just weird." Ain't nothing weird about a man and a woman having a good time, girlie. This guy was just not taking the hint. I didn't know how to say it, so I just stopped responding. But Louis didn't stop talking. He told me we could go out of town if I didn't want people seeing us together. We would keep it a secret. We could have fun. He knows how to show a lady a good time. His cousin works at the front desk at a motel out by the interstate. He'd give him a room under a fake name, no questions asked. I just stared ahead and out the front doors, desperately waiting for my ride to get here. I was beyond caring about my reputation at work. I'd deal with the consequences later, but for now, I had to leave as soon as possible. I grabbed my backpack so that I could bolt out as soon as I saw headlights in the parking lot. Suddenly, hot breath was on the back of my neck, and Louis standing right behind me. I could feel him grinding right up on me. "You know, I could do you real good, right?" he whispered breathily into my ear, sending chills of fear and nausea down my entire body. I ran out from behind the counter and out the front door. My ride wasn't there yet, but I didn't care, and I didn't slow down as I sprinted through the parking lot and out into the darkness. I ran in the opposite direction than I knew my friend would be coming, and he picked me up from the side of the road almost a mile from the store. My manager called and called, but I never answered or replied, and I never went back. I did, however, keep in touch with Jeremy, and he told him about what happened that night and all the events that led up to it. About 6 months after I left, Jeremy sent me a link to an article from our town's online newspaper. Louis' wife, mother, and grandmother were all arrested for sexually assaulting his daughter. But no one can convince me that Louis didn't know it was happening. Louis, let's never meet again. I hate that we ever met in the first place.